And welcome back to SWBA Today. And in today's episode, we're going to be looking at the SWBA play-in in the Eastern and the Western Conference. We're going to be doing game previews for tomorrow's games. Next, we're going to be looking at what has been going on in the association as the Suns decide to fire Mike Budenholzer. So we're going to be talking about that, along with the Pelicans. They are also making moves as they have decided to fire the head of basketball operations in David Griffin. And so we're going to be talking about the impact that is going to have. And so let's go ahead and jump into the SWBA play-in, and let's start with the Eastern Conference. And so if you're not familiar with it, look, the 7-8 game is taking place here tomorrow. That's going to be the Atlanta Hawks versus the Orlando Magic. And so the winner of that game is going to move on to play the Boston Celtics. The loser is going to have to wait for the winner of the 9-10 game. And then the winner of that is going to go ahead and play the Cleveland Cavaliers in the playoffs there. So let's go ahead and look at this matchup between the Orlando Magic and the Atlanta Hawks. And so you got the Atlanta Hawks that are going to be on the road against the Orlando Magic. And so initially, when you're talking about home court advantage in these situations, that can be huge. But in this particular game, I don't think that this is going to be an issue, because in the season series, both of these teams at 2-2, both teams have won on each other's home court. So I think that you really throw that out. Yes, it is going to be a bit more pressure, but I don't think that that's necessarily going to be a factor in tomorrow's game. And so next up, when you look at just the experience factor between these two teams, the Atlanta Hawks really would be the team that you would bet on, because the Atlanta Hawks are in a tie with the Lakers and the Pelicans with the most wins over the 5-year history of the SWBA play-in with 3. And so this is, an organization, a team that is very familiar with the play-in format. They know how to maneuver through this, and so they're very comfortable in this environment. And when you look at the Orlando Magic, yes, they don't have a ton of experience into this situation. This is their first time in the play-in, and there's been 21 teams out of 30 in the association that have been in the play-in. But the Orlando Magic, this was a team that was in the playoffs last year. They played the Cleveland Cavaliers, and they took them to Game 7 last year. And so just because this is the first time that they've been in the play-in, I don't think that you want to sleep on this Orlando Magic team, because this is a team, essentially it's the same one from last season, but they have KCP, who came over from the Denver Nuggets. And so you have added a person that has won a championship over here. And I think that that is going to really be an impact, which we're going to talk about that in a moment. So next, when we look at the key players in this game, or key players, I should say, with the Orlando Magic, we'll start there. I think that the Orlando Magic probably have some of the better young stars in the game. And as far as like a duo is concerned, because I think that what you get with Franz Wagner, and then also too with what you get with Banchero, like both of these guys can be just dynamic players. And look, with Banchero, here's a guy who's 6'10", and I mean, he essentially seems like he can play just about any position on the floor because of the way that he can handle. He can post up. He's a guy that can catch it in the transition game as well and make plays. And with Franz Wagner, look, he is super smooth. He's enlisted as small forward, but he's 6'10". I know he's more of like a kind of a 1-3 type of player because he can handle it. He's more of like your wing player, not necessarily one that operates in the post. But these two guys at 6'10", they are going to be a factor. And so when you look at Franz Wagner, a guy who missed time along with Banchero, these are guys that you say to yourself, all right, this team would have probably been in a better situation had they been healthy. Franz Wagner averaged 24.2 points a game, 5.7 rebounds a game, and 4.7 assists on 46.3% shooting. And look, Banchero, he's probably been one of the more hotter players in the league over the last stretch of games here. In fact, the Orlando Magic, they've been 9-3 over their last stretch of games. And he was the 8th leading scorer out of that time at 28.2 points a game and 47.6 as far as his field goal percentage is concerned. And so they are going to be absolute terrors to stop here for the Atlanta Hawks. And then when you look at the Hawks and what they have, it starts with Trae Young. And I think that, look, Trae Young, he's averaged a double-double against this team. In fact, he's averaged 30 points and 11.5 assists. So I think he's going to make a ton of plays out there. I think that another guy to really watch out for on this roster is going to be Dyson Daniels. We talked about this before with him. Dyson Daniels, I think, has really put himself in maybe the defensive player of the year kind of talks there with the way that he's played as far as getting steals and just his defensive improvement and just his overall improvement. In fact, has kind of put him into a situation where he's in strong consideration for the SWBA Player of the Year. And so, I think between those two players, those are two players to watch for on the Atlanta Hawks. And so when it comes down to who I think is going to win or what it's going to take to get the win, let's start with the Orlando Magic and their advantages. And so I think that Orlando, to me, because they're an experienced crew that has been there before, you kind of tip your hat to them a bit. And also, too, with the Orlando Magic, I think defensively, that's where they have the real advantage. Like defensively, Orlando is very tough. The issue with Orlando is they're just not a scoring team. They're not a team that wants to get out and just necessarily get into these running type of games. They want to be a team that gets you into these slow down type of games. And if they get you more into a half court game, if they're able to dictate the pace, they can be very tough to stop, because we just talked about, just the two main players with the Orlando Magic, but man, they have a ton of size to go with them. Like a guy like Wendell Carter Jr., their starting center. I think he's been kind of up and down, but this year I think he's been solid. That's another guy at 6'10". He can also step out and shoot the 3-point shot as well. And then, they have a guy like Jonathan Isaac, right? A young big as well at 6'10". He can come in and be certainly impactful against this Atlanta Hawks team that, in my opinion, it's pretty small across the board. So I think that the size advantage, the defense, you have to give that to the Orlando Magic. Plus, they've been there, all right? And so I'm not saying that Trae Young hasn't been there, but this team has recently been there, and they took, again, the Cleveland Cavaliers right down to the wire in Game 7. And I know Cleveland's changed a little bit, but for the most part, look, Cleveland's been tough over the last 2 seasons. And so I think that that's been a huge accomplishment. This is why you bring KCP over. And I think it's time for him to step up and really be an impact for this team. Expect for guys like Anthony Black to really make an impact. We've been talking about him, a 6'7" guard. Once again, talking about the length that you have with the Orlando Magic. And then they also have a good scorer that can get hot as well in Cole Anthony. And with the Atlanta Hawks, it's going to be all about their wing play. I think that that's where it's going to be one for them. Trae Young is a guy that is going to really set the table. He's going to hit, 3-point shots and things like that. He's going to have his ice cold dance going and all that stuff like that. But they don't have one of their major pieces in this one that was having a good season in Jalen Johnson at 6'8". I think he played a lot taller than what he was. And I feel like, look, it's a lot of pressure that's going to be on Terrence Mann, who played a really significant role with the Los Angeles Clippers. You have to rely on him. You have to rely on Niang, who's come over from the Cleveland Cavaliers. He was there last year. He's also with the Utah Jazz, a guy that's been very serviceable off the bench at the small forward position. And then, you have to worry about, too, a guy like LeVert, who's come over. So Karis LeVert, who was in that trade with DeAndre Hunter, where he went over to Cleveland and then he came over here to Atlanta. And so his experience as well is going to also play a factor against, the Orlando Magic. And so initially, I really like the Orlando Magic to win this game. But Atlanta, you cannot bet against them. But initially, I'm going with the Orlando Magic. And so we'll be talking a little bit more about that game tomorrow. And so next, I want to shift focus and go over here to the Western Conference and take a look at that game. And so tomorrow we got the Golden State Warriors versus the Memphis Grizzlies. And so initially, the thoughts out of this is that this is going to be a very chippy, saucy type of game. I think that these are two teams that, look, it's a bit of a rivalry there. I think that the last time that what Ja Morant was playing Golden State, that's where he got in trouble with the hand gestures. And so the going back and forth, like I think you're going to see very much all of that in this game. And this is an interesting situation because, we've been talking about the Golden State Warriors being a team that really nobody wants to face. I think that if they are able to get out of this, I think that this is a team that definitely you don't want to see them because of the championship experience, which we're going to talk about that in a moment. But on paper, it seems like this is something that Golden State, they would be able to take care of business because Golden State, they're 3-1 in the season series. They've owned really Memphis when it came down to playing them at home, which Memphis has not been able to figure it out in Golden State. And so this game is going to take place there. So that's a key to this game. And then when it comes down to just the playing style, right? Like I think that that's where it's going to become interesting. And so let's start really with what the Memphis Grizzlies have as an advantage. And so I think that on paper, when you look at this, the real advantage for the Memphis Grizzlies is going to be the size. I think that when you look at Memphis across the board, the kind of length that they have in the front court, it can really be an issue here for the Golden State Warriors. And I think that if they're clicking, this could be very interesting. Like Golden State could be in trouble because when you look at the length that the Memphis Grizzlies have, look, they've got a guy in Marvin Bagley, the third that's going to probably come off the bench and play a lot more since Brandon Clark has been out. But they have a rookie that not many people have been talking about enough in Zach Edey. I think he's been tough, 7'4", out of Purdue. I think he's been very productive. They have a guy in Jay Huff who can step out and shoot the three-point shot as well. They have Jaren Jackson Jr., who's going to be in the starting lineup, obviously, at 6'10". He blocks a lot of shots. Can he avoid the foul trouble? He's going to be a factor into this game. And so immediately you're talking about the length that they're going to put on the Golden State Warriors, and I'm thinking of the rebound battle. If they're able to out-rebound the Golden State Warriors, now you're talking about getting more possessions. You're going to get more opportunities, more shots at your goal, which could make it very interesting in Golden State. Now, if the Golden State Warriors are able to get the 50-50 balls and kind of just that takes away, I think, the size and the length that the Memphis Grizzlies have. Now, without that, it still becomes an interesting game because you have Ja Morant, who's going to make a ton of plays. He's going to be hitting three-point shots. I'm sure he's going to be doing his celebration. He's going to be going to the rim, all kinds of things. So he's going to put a lot of pressure on the perimeter defense of the Golden State Warriors. And look, he's going to be trying to get downhill. He's going to be trying to draw contact. He's going to be talking to him. It's going to be back and forth. He's going to make it interesting there. And an underrated player in this series, which could make it interesting, or I should say in this game, is Scottie Pippen Jr., right? And it's going to be his impact to also put pressure on the rim and then find others. I think he's a bit more of a distributor than Ja Morant. And so if he's getting inside and look, he's getting his looks, and then also too, he's finding some of these bigs or some of the wings for these easy cuts and things like that, that could make it tough on the Golden State Warriors. Now, with the Golden State Warriors, this is why I'm tipping the hat to them right now. Initially, look, the Golden State Warriors have been one of the better teams in basketball, especially since they got Jimmy Butler over. In fact, their record has been 23-7, and so that has been terrific. And then, you just look at the fact that just statistically, they've gone up in just about every major category. In defense, they're getting to the free throw line. Like, there's just so many pluses with the Golden State Warriors here. Then you add the fact that the championship experience, like you're looking at Steph Curry, he's a champion. Draymond Green, champion. Gary Payton II, champion. Steve Kerr, champion. Kevon Looney. Like, they have so many guys that have been to the top of the mountain. And I think that holds weight. That's a stat that you don't even have a stat sheet for that, because it does factor into the game. And I think that's going to make it very tough, on the Memphis Grizzlies, because when the game gets tight, trust that Draymond and those guys are going to be able to get to the set that they want, or perhaps get the stop that they need that is going to propel them to move forward. And so I think that is really one of the reasons why I majorly tipped the cap there to the Golden State Warriors. And then with Steph Curry, I mean, that's ridiculous with what he can do as a scorer. man, look, he has infinite range. As soon as he comes over the half court line, it could go up and it may go in. And then he's constantly moving. Defensively, I'm not sure that I have any Memphis Grizzlies defender that wants to see that. I don't think that there's any defender that they have on their roster that is going to want to chase Steph Curry around just like that. And so I think that that's going to be interesting. And I think really when we're looking at the X factor here for the Golden State Warriors, and really one that might not only tip the cap for this game, but it could tip the cap for a major run for them, is going to be what are they going to do with a guy like Jonathan Kuminga. I think that Jonathan Kuminga, I was very shocked that he didn't get a chance to play in this game against the Los Angeles Clippers. I would have liked to see him get some run. And I think if this Golden State Warriors team is going to make a push, he's going to have to play some more. And I think that Steve Kerr is going to have to trust him and let this young man play, because I think he does have a ton of potential. You know, when the ups are up there, you love it. When it's the low of lows, you hate it. And so I think at some point he's got to figure out with that floor, it's got to be a little bit higher. But I think he would be a major player for this team, you know, because Moses Moody, I think, has played well. Brandon Brzezinski has played well. I think Gary Payton II has played well. And even Quentin Post, who's had to step in and on an expanded role, has played well. And so, you know, I think that for me, it starts with Jonathan Kuminga, not only in this game, but moving forward for this series. And so let me know what you guys are thinking. I got the Golden State Warriors. And last bonus there, Jimmy Butler, that impact, we already know what that is. And so anyway, let's go ahead and look more into the association and look at what the Phoenix Suns have done here. And so shifting focus and looking at the Phoenix Suns, who have now fired Mike Budenholzer. And so this is the third coach that they fired. They fired him. They fired Frank Vogel, right? And then they've also fired Monty Williams as well. And so they fired those three coaches. And right now you have two coaches that are still on payroll. And so that's going to be Coach Budenholzer, who signed a 5-year deal, right? And so you fired him. And then I believe Frank Vogel is still on the contract as well. And so, look, the Phoenix Suns are a complete mess. And I think that what we're seeing here in this situation is I think that Coach Bud becomes a scapegoat here. Here's a guy that won a title with Giannis in Milwaukee, gets to this situation, and in year one, he's fired. All right. And so, look, are we looking at this situation and looking at the fact that you didn't have Kevin Durant down the stretch, who was absolutely injured at the end of the year? He also missed some time early. Then I think you've had some time missed from Devin Booker, even though he was relatively healthy for the season. And then Bradley Beal was out for a lot too as well. And so, look, the three main stars that he had to depend on weren't necessarily available. And so that is point number one here, why you just look at this firing and you go, look, he didn't even necessarily get a chance here. And I just think from the management all the way down, the Suns have got to look themselves in the mirror here, because, you know, it's just not working from top to bottom. It's just been a mess over there. And I don't know why they don't realize that essentially what they did with the Phoenix Suns situation and what they have there is it's almost similar to when Kevin Durant was with the Brooklyn Nets. You have three players, you have all your money tied up into them, and you aren't able to add the proper size to this team, because we know that they needed a center, right? They weren't able to do that. They also needed some other pieces. They didn't have a true point guard out there. Like, there's so many different things that was wrong with the Phoenix Suns that it's not even funny. And I think that when you look at just kind of the natural approach that they had when they made the finals, like, they've really moved on from that. And they went ahead, they tried to go out, trade for some big names in Kevin Durant and then Bradley Beal, and think that that was going to work. And it just doesn't work that way, especially now with the way that aprons are set up here in the SWBA. Those years of going out and trading for super teams and having that type of financial flexibility and being able to add stuff like that, it doesn't work like that anymore. You just don't win that way anymore in the SWBA. And so the Phoenix Suns, look, they're going to have to make some serious changes. And I think that if you're making the coaching change, fine, but you had better probably, maybe you're going to have to move on from either Kevin Durant or Devin Booker. Like you got to move on from one of these players. And I think that this team is headed for a hard reset in my personal opinion. I just don't think that, I don't care who you bring in next season, they're going to be able to figure it out with Phoenix. I think that they're going to have to make some major roster changes. Next up, we're taking a look here at the Pelicans and what they've done. And so they're electing to move on from David Griffin, and he was the head of basketball operations there. And so if you're not familiar with David Griffin, look, he's had some big success in this league. In fact, he was over there with the Cleveland Cavaliers, if I'm not mistaken. And so he was the guy that was responsible for putting that team together. They won a title when he was over there with the Cleveland Cavaliers. And so this is a guy that definitely knows, how to put teams together and things like that. But I think the issue with him, since he's been over here with the Pelicans, I think he's been tied to just some tough situations here because look, he was in the situation where he traded off Anthony Davis, who didn't want to be there. That's where they got Lonzo Ball back. That's also where they got Brandon Ingram, I think, was over there. And then they also got Jackson Hayes as well. Zion came in that deal. And so that whole situation really, when you look at it from the totality of it, it just didn't work out. Lonzo ended up getting traded. He missed time when he was there with the Pelicans, even though they showed some flashes. Brandon Ingram, no longer with the franchise. He got traded off, right? You look at the fact that Jackson Hayes, here's a player that he's no longer with the franchise. He's with the Lakers starting. And then with Zion, look, Zion, man, he is just, that has probably been, I think, one of the more disappointing things because you see the flashes, you see the brilliance, but he cannot stay on the court. And I must say it must be one of the most interesting contract clauses too, that if you ever take a look at that contract, that it wants you to go take a look at it because it's so interesting with the way that they have it set up with the participation and all the stuff that he has to do in order to get the guarantees. And I think he missed them and he didn't get the guaranteed money. And so, look, it's one of those situations now where you have to say to yourself, we probably need to move on because I don't know if they're going to ever see Zion really take off there. And I think the Pelicans need a hard reset as well. I think that, he probably needs to go. They probably need to go ahead and move on from that backcourt over there. And then, I think with the DeJounte Murray deal, look, that looks like that's become a disaster. And that's something that I think a lot of people aren't mentioning. Dyson Daniels was the player that got traded off, and Dyson Daniels pretty boisterous, has been like one of the better players in the SWBA. Meanwhile, DeJounte Murray, like it's unfortunate he got hurt, but man, it looks like the Atlanta Hawks won that deal. And so look, and the one who made that trade was David Griffin. And so I just think that, look, you have got to clean house if you're with the Pelicans. And so let me know in the comments what you're thinking here. Do the Pelicans now get going in the right direction now that they moved on from David Griffin? Do you feel like, the Suns were right in moving on from Coach Budenholzer? And also, too, let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking with the West coming up. Do you feel like the Golden State Warriors are going to take care of business against the Memphis Grizzlies tomorrow? And do you feel like, it might be the Orlando Magic that also advance? I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. And as we always say, see the game, be the game. I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.